strategy? I mean, what Abhijit's saying is makes a lot of sense. So what's your take on this? I mean, what is driving all of this? Are we really in a situation of civilizational decline in the West? Is that what's happening?
I think it actually is a continuation of a process that's been going on for a long period of time. I don't think this is a new strategy that's being unleashed. I think it's part of a long-term strategy. It's a conclusion of philosophies that were set in motion a long time ago. And the tragedy is that this is not something new. These philosophies and ideologies have been deployed and trotted out in various societies in various times in history, and they always have the same conclusion. And the conclusion is a dramatic increase in individual suffering and a dramatic increase in collective suffering. It's literally like taking a Ferrari which is functioning so beautifully and giving it to a person who is a bicycle puncture repair person, and allowing that person to try and make it function like a bicycle does, but they have no vision of something more refined, something more subtle, something which requires less hands-on interference, but perhaps appreciation and just the occasional tiny nudge if and when necessary or requested. And Abhijit, you made a closing point there about the freedom to risk offending somebody. And I think it's like a compass pointer for us, because it's a power struggle that has moved into the space of giving and taking offense, right? And the capacity to give offense and to risk giving offense should absolutely be protected, because that's how we get to know each other, and that's how we refine knowledge and churn understanding to get better and better. Understanding, revelations, visions, intuition, all of that sort of stuff comes from a churning. And you can't churn without risking causing some upheaval. The issue, though, is when shall we say, the freedom to take offense becomes completely unrestrained. You know, you'll see a 4-year-old child on the floor in a supermarket next to an aisle, thrashing away with legs and shaking heads and screaming, and the mum somewhere sitting there thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do in public? This child is embarrassing me. It's a power play, isn't it? And the power play is that if my choice is not respected, then I'm going to take offense. And that's nothing other than power. I'll give an example that sometimes I think should be taught. Well, I remember when I was much younger, and we were studying for a technical drawing exam. I loved drafting schemas and plans and stuff. And the day of the examination, I arrived in the drafting hall with all the papers and everything laid out, and I thought I'd just go and wash my hands to get rid of any smudging marks that might cause the paper to become unclean. And whilst I was washing my hands, the teacher, Mr. Eggleton, and it's a shout out to him if he's still out there. He was such a lovely, lovely man. He leaned over my shoulder and he said, you know, Satish, you can put as much soap as you want, but that won't come off. Right? And it was a reference, obviously, to the fact that I have pigmentation in my hands. But he said it, and it broke the tension of being stressed out about an exam. You know, at that time in history, it was a joke that you could make with somebody, and they could rely on the fact that you had a supportive, loving friendship, and you could actually risk offending each other. When he said it, I thought it was quite funny. And, you know, it obviously didn't harm any of my sort of performance. I got excellent results in that exam, and I remember him with a great deal of fondness. And in today's age and day and sort of time that we're in, somebody could use that sort of a friendly remark and destroy that person's career. And it's nothing other than abusive power. So this is about power. It's not about justice. It's not about reason. It's not about friendship. It's not about what's good for society. It's purely about power. And that's something that I think needs to be looked at. I call people who do this tantrumites. You know, it's almost like we have a curse of a plague of tantrumites everywhere. And I think Peter Hitchens came out with an incredible statement. He said that we have a plague of emotional hemophiliacs. that their emotions are bruised with the slightest little bit of emotional contact. And this is a psychosis. This is not a reasonable way of existing in the world. It's not a way in which one's own personal sense of fulfillment will be enhanced. It's not a way in which you can achieve that satisfaction of having done incredible things in your own life and with other people. It is purely a how do I grab power by leveraging this capacity to be offended. And so that's a fundamental thing. But there's one other aspect of this, is that we are a wisdom tradition. And wisdom traditions allow a person to move from one understanding to another understanding to a better understanding. And by better, again, I come back to this notion of a diminution in suffering, individual and collective. That's what wisdom is. And people amassed wisdom and then shrined it into laws. Over a period of time, human democracies and human societies, we develop a framework of rules. And those rules are based on collective wisdom gathered over generations. Now that's of incredible value. That is the knowledge base of humanity. It's the inheritance of existing here for a long period of time. The contrary position is that you abandon wisdom and you invest in an ideology which gives you power through the capacity to be offended. So the exclusion that is being achieved by this diversity and inclusion initiative, the greatest exclusion is the exclusion of wisdom, of human understanding, of the right to learn, the right to discard one set of ideas and move to a better set of ideas. And this is nothing other than an oppressive priesthood masquerading in every sphere of life. The priesthoods were notorious for doing this. Whether it was excommunication, whether it was castration, whether it was ostracization, it's exactly the same thing. We've got power. How do we cling on to it, no matter what happens? The trouble that we face in Eastern societies is that we still trying to make people wise. Okay? We think if we tell them and educate them and point out exactly the flaws in their arguments, they too will come to the table and sit and we can be nice friends together. But that doesn't notice the power play that's in play. I'm reminded by a remark that Shakuni made to Krishna Bhagwanji in the Mahabharata, where he said, I'm not interested in dharma. He said, I walk down the street and I want people to look at me and be impressed. Right? I want them to be impressed by my wealth, by my stature and everything else. So he didn't have the wherewithal or the sensitivity to appreciate a more subtle, refined way of understanding. And we are in a world which is producing more and more shakunis, cunning operators, desirous of power, and desirous of some degree of self-affirmation by diminishing others. It's almost become cultural. And we have to recognize this. This is our contribution. This is the contribution of all of the wisdom traditions, that we have to find a way of confining and containing this emotional adolescence, which has acquired sort of possession and ownership of a Gatling gun rather than just a tiny little pistol, and is going around wreaking havoc. The last point, which I think Abhijit touched on so sensitively, was this notion about gender and children. If you want to enslave a person, the best way of enslaving them is in a manner that they don't know. I think it was Goethe who said those who are the most enslaved are those who believe themselves to be free. Right? And what you can do that with children. Children, we have this idea of sanskar, don't we? That if you give children sanskar, those are the fundamental truths that you can give to a child that it will receive without scrutinizing them in that age group. Whatever you give to that child, it will receive it, if it's from a figure of authority or a figure with power or a figure which dominates. And when you are implanting into the subconscious of human beings a whole load of contradictory, conflicting feelings and words and thoughts, you have a child who has no basis in stability, no mental stability, no emotional stability. It's a child who's perpetually fragile. Even when they grow up into becoming a human being, there is that emotional fragility and a lack of confidence in their own reasoning faculty. Those two are what you need to instill in children at a young age to enslave the human being for the rest of their existence. And it's a tragedy that we're now seeing societies which are doing this in such a systematized manner. It's almost as though the society itself in the West has taken the authority of crippling. Um, in Yog Vidya, we have the notion that the Jivatma is a Hansa, a swan, and one of the wings is the wing of Vidya, and the other wing is Gyan, and one wing is the compassion, love. And so the two wings, the head and the heart, basically. If you cripple both of those, then the Jivatma, the swan, can never fly. It crawls along with its belly on the floor, suffering from, one step to the next step. And this is what's being done to the human condition. Rather than that Jivatma flying on strong wings of wisdom and compassion and love and affection, it's become less than itself. And any creature in suffering is always seeking an end to that suffering. And boy, if you can convince them that you have just what's needed to diminish and maybe even end that suffering, then you have a slave. And I think this is happening on a scale that we've never seen before. Abhijit, you alluded to Palo Alto. I'm just down the road from Palo Alto. I spent a few days down in Palo Alto on my last trip only a month ago. And it's nuts. If anybody has seen The Truman Show, I felt I was walking along streets in The Truman Show. Even the trees look as though they are petrified to move a leaf out of place. Everything is so manicured and forced into a vision which somebody has had, and they have applied it onto a natural environment. It's pristine and it's clean and everything else, but my goodness, not even a tree would move a leaf out of place for fear. And that's how it felt. And I think what's come out of Silicon Valley is the capacity to project these psychoses across more people than ever before. The capacity to reach into hearts and minds all over the world and instill some sense of discomfort and suffering, put in the seeds of mental illness. And they are doing it with an efficiency which is ruthless. It does need to be dealt with. And I think those who are Sanatanis, who have had the benefit of dharmic samskar, right, we have to step up and stand on the strength of those samskar and actually start to heal and reverse this mechanism. We only have a short period of time to do it in. I'm speaking with many members who are the younger generation, and I'm hearing them articulate words and say thoughts which they have sort of appropriated as their own, and yet you can hear that these have been seeded at some point in that child, and that child is articulating them. We have a lot of work to do in this space, and we'll do it. The Gita is the greatest guide. Even if you have the Narayani Sena on the battlefield across from you, and they've never been defeated, and all you need is a courageous Arjuna and guidance and an adherence to Dharma, and the blessings of the energies that have created the whole of the world. If you have those three, then everything else will collapse. In just one last thought has occurred to me. Ravan was one of his attributes, his siddhis, was that he was a master of illusion. He could weave illusions with words. And so he would create fantasies and people would completely fall for them. There are times when I feel that Ravan, when he was removed from Lanka, came to the West and has been weaving the most amazing fantasies and deluding people into understandings of the world which are not real at all. And people are falling into conflict as a result of those. So we have a challenge on our hands.
There's so much in what you've just said. I don't even know where to begin. There were lots of strands. I mean, firstly, your description of San Francisco and comparing it, the clinical way in which everything is manicured and perfect, but yet frightened to get out of its box. It's such a opposite, it's such an antithesis of the streets of Delhi, for example, Abhijit. Whereas I know whenever I've been, it's like it's a cacophony. There's just chaos everywhere, and yet people seem to be having fun. Whereas I think what you're describing, Panditji, is that it's all perfect, but nobody's having any fun. It's actually quite scary.
It's violence, Navitaji. I was looking and I felt that even the environment has been subjected to a horrific, psychotic level of violence. And I'm sure anybody who would come from the indigenous communities would feel that. It's that small person's desire to find worth in imposing upon the biggest canvas that they can possibly find. Enslave other people, empower yourself by disempowering others. And what can be greater for somebody like that than enslaving the whole of the planet? Enslaving cities. And it's tragic. It really is. I've been observing people driving. You've mentioned Delhi and places like this. I've been observing people driving here, and there is silence. You have these electric cars, right? They glide by. Everybody knows exactly what's expected of them. Nobody winds a window down to shout at each other and gesture anymore. It's just unbelievably silent, and it's scary. It's not ebullient. It's not radiant. It's not life with its infinite capacity to project itself into every moment. It's not. It's
Sounds
just
very sterile.
sanitized. It's sanitized and sterile. Sterile is a great word for it, especially since we're speaking of the processes of genderization.
Is it a surprise that it's all originating out of California, the beacon of the tech giants?
The ancient Romans had a saying, which some part of it I think is often forgotten. Ex oriente lux, from the east comes light. Well, the other part of it is ex occidente lex, from the west comes law, right? And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the West project dominating words, which is what law is, into the whole of the Earth space, and the light has to come from the east. We are recovering from the ravages of this colonization period, and we can't recover fast enough. Everybody needs for us to recover very, very fast. We've been given a window of opportunity, and it'll happen very quickly. I often say to people, this facade that looks so impenetrable, it's actually a tissue. It's a wall painted on tissue paper, and it looks so impenetrable that nobody will actually attack it. Right? The vision of it is so impressive and powerful. And yet when you do start to attack it, it crumbles, it dissipates, it just evaporates because it's not real. And no matter what you do, the beauty of being physical beings in a material world is that you can pretend reality is whatever you think it is, but you can't. I think it was Ayn Rand who said that you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. It comes back and bites you, and I think we have to build a case on that reality. We're in that place. We can do this, and we need to do this. And if we don't do it, I think we will lose too many young, bright souls who are incredibly intelligent, unbelievably capable, and that intelligence and wisdom that I'm seeing, or the potential for deep wisdom that I'm seeing among so many youngsters, it will result in the worst level of mental illness. With each generation and each incarnation in our tradition, we say that you accumulate wisdom until you get to a time in your journey where you have so much wisdom, so much understanding, that you're on the verge of becoming an enlightened rishi. But imagine if that rishi is never introduced to the ideas and understandings and visions that are necessary in that incarnation. I feel that this is what many of our young generation are like, incredibly powerful intellects, and yet being crippled and compromised and experiencing unbelievable suffering. A friend here in the US shared with me that only last year they had over 120,000 suicides amongst young adults. And this is the nation which is the land of the brave and the home of the free and the leading first world nation. It's a facade. It's a facade which is crumbling. And as it tumbles, I think we need to help dig away at its foundations and then step aside so that it doesn't collapse on top of us.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.